And now we're on air.
We're on the air. This Hangout on Air is live.
It is officially started.
It has. It has. Okay, so we've changed a little bit. You know, it's another day. We recorded Dr. Steph and I recorded part one of APG 175 late last night, and now it is Friday morning, and joining me is Miami Rick.
Hey everybody, glad to be home after my odyssey yesterday, which I'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay,
it was a good one though.
Well, why don't we just start off the whole thing?
Okay.
Get into the feedback. So what was going on with you?
All right. So basically, this is what happened. As you guys know.
Oh, wait a minute.
What happened?
I just realized I don't have my audio recorder recording.
Yeah,
so it's probably record that. So
it's a small detail, just details.
Okay. I got it on now.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll notice now that there's daylight behind me. I have the window open, and you can see part of my backyard, and you can see over. If you're watching, that is, if you're watching the video. If you're not watching, if you're listening to the audio podcast, then of course just use your imagination.
Imagine daylight.
Yeah, and hey, you hear that voice? That is not Dr. Steph. That is Miami Rick, and he is now joining us for the rest of the show, the feedback portion of the show. It's the next morning, and Rick was just about to tell us his adventure this week.
Hey APGers, yeah, so I'm glad to be back with you. I was really looking forward to doing the first part of the show as well, but I had a little bit of an odyssey yesterday. Interesting story. Well, as you guys know, I left on a 5-day trip, obviously 5 days ago. And I was in Santiago because I was doing my my annual emergencies and CRM training down there, which is something that even us lowly cargo pilots need to deal with. So I was down there for a couple of days taking care of that, and then the idea was for me to fly the jet back, take the 777 back up to Miami on just a regular trip, and just to end my trip the way I started it, just flying the jet. And I was looking forward to that. And in very predictable cargo fashion, the night before I was supposed to fly the trip back, I get a message from scheduling saying that the plane was no longer going to be going through Santiago because it had picked up a charter somewhere else, and there was going to be another 777 coming in. But later in the day, the problem with that was that I couldn't do that trip because it would have put me back in Miami after midnight, and they couldn't do that because as of midnight, my days off start, and I can't fly during my day off, because of contract conflicts and negotiations and all that kind of stuff. So they put me on a passenger flight. So I was flying back, passenger flight. We ended up leaving an hour late because they had change of equipment. We were supposed to fly back on a 787-9, and I was comfy, pre-checked on a business class seat up there. They downsized the airplane to a -8, which means that all of a sudden I got, bumped to back, which I don't care. It's fine. A little economy travel. It's not bad. Then we get to Miami, and obviously an hour late because we left an hour late. And as we land, we taxi off the runway, and I hear the cockpit crew shut down one of the engines, which is something that we do when there's going to be a long taxi in or taxi out procedure. Just to do a little fuel savings. But the interesting thing is that instead of taxiing where we usually go to, which is usually towards the end of the south runway 9 in Miami, at the end of that runway, there's a terminal where we park, and I've seen Acme there quite often as well, which is a pretty short taxi from the end of the runway to our terminal. But we get off we taxi off the runway, and we start going towards the north side of the airport, and I'm like, wait a minute, does it mean are we going to park somewhere else? What's going on here? And all of a sudden, we park in this little spot in the middle of the airport called the penalty box. And the penalty box is basically a spot, and many airports have it. It's basically where they're going to park you, so you're out of the way. So people and airplanes can taxi past you, go from the terminal to the runways, and vice versa. And you're just basically not creating a bottleneck or a traffic jam up there. So the captain gets on the PA and he tells us, well, apparently there's no gate available, and we're waiting to hear back from gate assignment within the next 30 to 35 minutes, and you can imagine, people weren't too thrilled to hear that because we'd left an hour late, and now we're going to be sitting there for about an hour, a half hour more. So we finally get a gate assigned. We park the airplane, get off the airplane. People are not happy. And as I'm gonna go through passport control, I usually go through these little kiosks called global entry, which instead of having your passport stamped by an immigration officer, you just go up, put your passport on the reader, put your fingerprints down to take a picture of you. A receipt gets printed out, and then you walk out. For some reason, that system wasn't working, so everyone that not a lot of people have global entry. It's just just airline pilots and people that travel quite a bit, but it usually means that you don't have to do the line. And we weren't in the only flight flying in at that time, so the line to get through passport control was endless. And then I finally get picked up. When I didn't get picked up, actually, I got a call saying that the car had gotten a flat tire, and I was like, oh, man, really? So I had to take a cab to go meet up and help my wife out with the tire change operation in some street in the dark. So I finally got the tire fixed, got home, something like, what was it, 11:30 or 11:15, 11:30 last night, and by that time it was too late to join you guys with the first portion of the show. But here I am today, it's a new day, so I'm happy to be back home, days off now, and ready to tackle some feedback.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you back. Sorry for your ordeal.
Hey man, it's that's the salt of life. It makes life fun.
That is true. That is true. So again, if you are, you'll have to use your imagination if you're listening to the audio. If you're watching us right now, and by the way, we're recording this live on Google Hangouts on Air. You'll see that both Rick and I are wearing the baseball cap that has the letters VKX, Victor Kilo X-ray. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the show where Tony and his son Colin, I guess, were at the National Air and Space Museum back, when was that? The 20th of last month, I think.
Yep.
And they missed us. They didn't see us. They were out there on the exterior or outside airplane display.
Yep.
And I guess, we just didn't see them. We didn't connect. But he sent 3 of these very nice baseball caps from Potomac. Let me see. Potomac Airfield is what's written on the back. And very nice. Thank you again. And I'll read his letter. He said, sorry, we missed you at the NASM fly-in. Enclosed, you'll find some coffee money, which he sent in a separate envelope. And thank you very much for the coffee fund donation. And some caps from the coolest airport in the flight restricted zone, the FRZ. Talked a little bit about that, part 1. Keep up the great work with the podcast, Tony. So thank you again, Tony, for the goodies and the very cool baseball cap.
Yeah, thanks, Tony and Colin. I'm going to take this hat flying with me on my next trip and look for some pictures of that. It's going to be cool.
Did you notice that, or actually I looked up the airport in my research, and I found that the people that made these caps, they didn't put like a metal button on the top so that it doesn't interfere with your headset. So another.
I noticed that. And that's actually interesting you mentioned that, because I usually fly with a hat on when it's I usually just fly with a hat on, and I actually take that button out because it does get in the way. It kind of gets a little, like your head gets a little sore if you have that on there and you have your headset on top of that. So good looking out.
Oh, okay. You know what? They're saying that they can only see you. So
well, that's not a bad thing, actually.
You know what? I think it's because I white boxed Miami Rick on the video. So sorry about that. I don't know how that happened, but now whoever's talking loudest, I guess, will show up on the video. Okay, enough about the video. I'm alienating everybody that is listening to the audio. Again, if you want to check out the video, you can head over to airlinepilotguide.com, look for episode 175, or just go to the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/airlinepilotguy. I think that's the way you get there. Okay. So we have some of that out of the way. Let's go ahead and move on into, which is what we like to call the best part of the show, the feedback.
Captain, incoming message.
All right. Let's see. Let's start off with some audio feedback from, well, he's going to say who it's from.
G'day, Captain Jeff. My name is Tadeu. I'm from Brazil. You can call me Taj if you want. That's how people call me here. And first, I would like to congratulate you for the podcasts and, all your work putting these things together for us pilots. They are great. I find your podcast very useful. I always listen to them whenever I'm on my layovers. I find them very useful to keep up to date with what's happening in the industry. And it's a great way to study as well, because, us pilots sometimes are really tired and we basically fall asleep when you try to read something. And listening to the podcast whenever we go to the gym and stuff, it's a great way to keep up to date and to study. So it's great to hear what other pilots around the world are their views on the subjects that you discuss on your podcast, and also pilots that fly different airplanes. It's great to know more experienced people talking about different subjects. Gives us less experienced pilots more a better understanding of the situations. Well, that's it. Now, my question for you, it's something that I've been waiting to send this feedback, because I don't really know how the regulations work in the US where you were flying, but back here in Brazil, since the German wing accident, we now have to have a flight attendant coming into the flight deck every time one of the pilots go to the toilet, or every time one of the pilots leaves the flight deck for any reason. We must have a flight attendant coming in and waiting with the other pilot until the captain or the first officer comes back. In my opinion, I really think that's an overreaction from airlines, because we've had things like that, similar episodes like that happening in the past, and that didn't change anything. But since the last one, now they have, they found that it's mandatory to have someone in the flight deck with the other pilot whenever one of them leaves the flight deck. I would like to hear your opinion about that. If you think that's good or not. Hey, Captain Jeff, it's me again. Sorry about that. I think there's a time limit of 3 minutes, and I'm continuing on my question here. Well, yeah, I would like to hear your opinion about that. If you think that's really useful, you think that's good or not, and we also like to hear how you guys do in the company that you work, because that's, at least here in Brazil, it's not something enforced by the local authority. Is an airline decision. Well, that's it. Another thing I would like to share with you guys is something that really bothers me, is that since the accident, people tend to think that co-pilots, or first officers as we are called, don't know how to fly airplanes. Basically, since the accident, when they start showing how the accident happened, they blame, of course, it was his fault. He basically flew the airplane on the ground, but and they start trying to, they kind of relate to, they kind of say that co-pilots are not pilots. Co-pilots are just pilots monitoring. every time they show the accident and they show, they describe what happened, they mention co-pilot as not being a pilot, basically, and they say the pilot went to left the flight deck and the co-pilot was there on his own, and they don't make that clear that pilot, both captain and first officer, are pilots. You have a captain and a first officer, but both of them are pilots. And even after that, whenever I talk to people that don't really know much about aviation, and I tell them I am a pilot, they ask me, well, are you a pilot or are you a co-pilot? When clearly both are pilots. You just have a captain and a first officer, but we both are rated to fly the airplanes that we are flying. Well, that's it, man. That's all for now. I will start sending you more voice feedbacks whenever I can. But yeah, I would like you to comment on that if you can. Thanks a lot for your podcast again. And I think, yeah, just keep up the great work that you are doing for us pilots. And from the Southern Hemisphere, I'm sending you a big thank you again. All right. Have a good one. Good day. Bye.
Well, thank you, Taj, for the feedback, and you addressed a couple of things. First of all, he was talking about the aftermath of the German wings tragedy and the fact that many of the airlines that had already not implemented the new policy regarding, never leaving a pilot alone in the cockpit, many airlines, even before it was a regulation to do so in their own country, decided to implement the new procedure. And I kind of see where he's coming from, Rick. How is this going to really prevent anything from happening? I mean, immediately after takeoff or just before landing, if one of the pilots wants to crash the airplane, there's really nothing the other pilot can do about it, probably. So,
right. Right. Well, we also have to keep in mind that these kinds of recommendations are there because, as we all know, passenger aircraft after 9/11 were all equipped with fortified doors. These doors are pretty impenetrable. So I remember in my airline, when I used to fly passengers, that was the procedure. If a flight crew member had to leave his control position for any reason, for any length of time, there were two things that we needed to do. The first one was to coordinate the actual exit procedure of the pilot or co-pilot from the cockpit to what's called the protected area. So we had to call the flight attendant in that area, and then they had to protect the area, that protected area. I'm sorry about saying protected so many times. And then have the pilot come out, and then have a flight attendant go into the flight deck. That person would actually not sit in the pilot's seat. He would actually, or she would actually just, stand up in the flight deck while the pilot was doing whatever he was doing outside. And then for the pilot to get back in, we had to coordinate that as well, protect that protected area as well, have the guy go in, have the other guy or gal go out. And so it was kind of it is kind of a little. It's an operation. Now, for us in the cargo side of things, it's not as hard because we don't have a protected door. I mean, our airplane has basically a curtain that separates the flight deck from the supernumerary area, so it's not a protected or an impenetrable barrier that separates the cockpit from the rest of the plane. And in many times, it's only two of us flying. So if one of us has to go to the restroom or wants to go make himself or herself a cup of coffee, then the other pilot is going to be left in the flight deck by him or herself. So it's really not that big a deal. Also, Tosh, I think it's a good idea to talk about how Tosh he reached out to me on Twitter and he said that he was looking forward to having the first APG meetup down there in Brazil. So I'm going to be heading down to Brazil on Wednesday, and I should be there Thursday and Friday. So, Taj, if you're down there, let's line something up, and we can have our first Brazilian APG meetup. That'd be pretty cool.
Hey, what about me?
You gotta fly the friendly American skies, man.
Okay. I guess I'll just leave it up to you. Friendly Brazil. Yeah. So let's see. The other thing he talked about was the use of pilot, co-pilot, and the fact that journalists have no clue what the difference is between a captain and a first officer, a co-pilot, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? This has been a problem long before this Germanwings crash, Tash. Maybe that's the first time you've noticed it. But they just have a lot of trouble understanding what our jobs are and what our roles are, etc. And I guess the only thing I can say to you is just get used to it, because it's, just getting upset about it just it's just not healthy, because it's just no matter how much we try to straighten all of it out, no one seems to understand. So that's why we have forums like this, where we can talk to people and say, we are equally qualified to fly the airplane. In many cases, the captain has more experience, not always, but usually has more experience overall, may not have more experience in the airplane. In fact, I fly with a lot of people on the Mad Dog that have more experience than I do, because they've been flying it longer than I have. But of course, that's not lately. That hasn't really been the case, because I've been on it for so long.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Who's been flying the Mad Dog longer than you? That's an FO, really?
They got hired by Acme, and that was their first position, and they've been on it ever since. And
oh wow, okay.
They're probably going to wait until they can fly captain on it, and just slide over to the left seat. And then I do apologize to Tash for taking so long to answer this. He sent this to me originally, this audio feedback in May 11th, like 2 months ago. So you can see how far behind we are here on the show. So he sent me another email, and he said that maybe you didn't get it, but we did. And then he said he flies the Embraer 195, and he said he also talked about something that we have talked about in a more recent episode 172, where a listener sent you a question about being mandatory or not to have the autopilot engaged while flying in RVSM airspace. Reduced vertical separation minima, I believe, is what that stands for.
That is correct, sir.
And I had a look at, or on the MEL, the minimum equipment list of the airline that I work for, and the answer is that you must have at least one autopilot channel operative and engaged when flying in RVSM airspace. So if neither of the two channels are operative, you can take off if the weather conditions are ceiling 1,000 foot or above, visibility 5,000 meters or above, and you must fly below flight level 290. So in other words, if your autopilot, at least one autopilot channel, is not operative, then you have to stay out of the RVSM airspace, which is flight level above flight level 290, I guess.
290 to 410. Yep.
There you go. So thank you, Taj, and I hope that you and Miami Rick and maybe some others down there in where'd you say, Rio?
No, it's the airport is Sierra Bravo Kilo Papa. That's Campinas.
Oh, Campinas. Okay.
Yep.
Well, maybe somebody else listening to the show will be down in the area as well, and we'll have a APG South, very south.
Very south.
Meetup. All right. Moving on. Al writes, you can call me Al. I should get that sound clip, right?
Yeah.
Who's that?
I'm trying to think. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I can't think of it.
Oh well, I'll remember it at some point after we finish the show. Hey, Captain Jeff, my name is Al, and I'm listening to you from the DFW Metroplex. I just recently discovered your show and now a big fan. I want your opinion on a huge life decision that I have to make within the next month. I've just been notified that I have been selected for a pilot slot through the Air Force Officer Training School, OTS, for active duty. I've also been selected at my local Air National Guard unit to fly C-130s. I'm extremely honored and blessed to be chosen for 2 once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. However, I'm having trouble deciding which route I should go. I wanted to get your opinion on the Guard versus active duty route. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thanks. Well, engaged Al on privately in email because I wasn't sure exactly when I'd get a chance to answer his question on the show, and basically told him this, that if his goal is to get into the airlines someday, I would highly recommend that he take the Air National Guard slot and fly the C-130s, mainly because your commitment is different. When you, as I did, I went into the active duty Air Force. And in fact, I didn't really know much at all about the Air National Guard and the reserves before I went in, and I was off at Officer Training School, OTS, and I met this guy, and he was there with a pilot slot for his guard unit at Dobbins Air Force Base for a C-130, and he explained the whole reserve. For him, in his case, was reserve, U.S. Air Force Reserve unit. And I said, oh, that's what I want to do. And he goes, well, it's too late for that because you're active duty now. And the difference is that when you're in active duty, that's it. You are solely an Air Force officer and an Air Force pilot. And you can't do any other jobs on the side, like, fly for an airline while you're on active duty. And your commitment at the time that I was in was 6 years from the time that you get your wings. So that's, after officer training school, which is a little bit more than right around 3 months, and then pilot training for another year. And then at the end of pilot training, you get your wings, and that starts your 6-year clock or your commitment. Now it's like 10 years or maybe even more.
Wow.
So, if you're in active duty, you can figure that you're going to be in at least 12 years, maybe more, before you'll be eligible to separate from the Air Force and then try to get hired by an airline. On the other hand, Air National Guard and Reserve units, you get the same exact training that I received in the Air Force and active duty pilots receive. And then you fly for your unit, and then just as soon as you have the hours, the experience necessary to get hired by an airline, you can do that as well. So you're kind of doing your military flying on a part-time basis, or you can also do it full-time as well in certain situations. But so it's like having the best of both worlds. You get that great military training, and you get to fly military airplanes. The C-130 is a really cool airplane. And you can, as soon as you have the requirements to get on with an airline, you're there. And the importance of that is, especially with an airline that is based on seniority, that your whole career will be that much better because you'll be hired earlier, and then you'll have many more opportunities. So that is what I recommended to him. And he said, yeah, since I sent you the email, I've been talking with several other pilots, and they all said the same thing as you, that they would definitely go for the Air National Guard slot flying the C-130. So good luck to you, Al, in your military and future airline career. Hope that it all works out for you.
Absolutely. Good luck.
Okay, let's see. Larry sent this to me regarding Honda Jet. I don't know if it's still, I think it's still being tested right now. I'm not sure if it's gotten its certification yet or not. Honda Jet is a very light jet, a VLJ, twin engine jet that Honda, the car company, they have an aviation division, has basically a clean sheet design. You'll notice that the Honda Jet, if you've seen any pictures of it, is unusual because its engines are wing mounted, but they're not slung below the wings. They're mounted on top of the wings. And I don't know, maybe there have been some designs in history that utilize that design concept for in mounting the engines, but I've never seen one myself. And so it's,
yeah, there's a German airplane that had that configuration. I forget the exact designation, but and I'm talking in the 70s. Maybe mid to late 70s, even early 80s. It was a German design that had the pods on top of the wings, and the engines were wing mounted, but on top of the wing itself. There's a few Russian planes that have wing mounted engines that these are made by Beriev, which is they basically do amphibious airplanes. So they'll put the engine on top of the wing, and then the engine outlet just on top of the, I guess, the top portion of the wing, so that airflow accelerates and has the airplane take off and land at a lower airspeed. That's a really cool design as well. But
oh, neat.
It's yeah, I've seen it before.
Yeah. So if you just quickly look at some of the photos of these Honda jets, it appears that the engines are a traditional tail-mounted engine design, but then you look a little bit more closely and go, oh, they're not attached to the fuselage back there. They're actually attached to the wing, and the pods kind of project them aft of the wing. And the advantage there is that the fuel is in the wings, so your fuel delivery is much simplified and not running through the fuselage back to the engines. And I'm sure there are some other advantages for this design. But anyway, the whole point of this was not to really discuss the design of the Honda jet, but the fact that they had an incident near Larry. Larry lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they were performing a flight test, and the airplane left the runway after blowing a tire. So oops. I'll put a link to this incident in the show notes. And this happened quite some time ago, June 11th, I believe, but somewhere in there. So thanks, Larry, for keeping us up to date on the happenings in Tulsa. And if I ever have a layover there in Tulsa, we can get together for an Oklahoma meetup.
Hey, how about me?
Well, then you'll have to fly the friendly skies of America. It's all American. Okay, Anonymous sent this. Let's see. I love the show. Look forward to it whenever it shows up in my podcast feed. I especially love the long episodes. The more, the better. Well, thank you, Anonymous. Let's see. First off, about transitioning to jets. When in the approach phase, is it true that you keep the N1 up a little higher with more drag so that when you go missed, you can shed the drag much faster than the time it takes for the engines to spool up to toga, which is takeoff go-around power? If not, would you mind going over the proper approach setup, please? It depends on the airplane, I guess, and and the engines that are on the airplane. Wouldn't you say, Rick?
Yeah, well, at least in the airplanes that I've flown, on the 767 and now the 777, we have two types of idles. We have your air idle and your ground idle. The air idle is higher for that very reason, so that if you do need to go from, well, not air idle, approach idle and ground idle. So if you need to go from approach power to toga thrust because of a go-around or a wind shear encounter, then the engines take a lot less time to spool up to max thrust. Then once you get on the ground, then the engines will go down to what's called ground idle. And how does the airplane know? Well, there's this switch on the wheels called the WOW switch, the weight on wheel switch. It's basically a sensor that tells the airplane whether it's in the air or it's on the ground. It's very simple. When the switch is closed, when that circuit's closed because of the weight of the aircraft on the wheel, then a lot of systems are reconfigured to work on ground mode, and then that's one of them. So that's how it works.
All right, very good. And Masha in the chat room came through for us. Paul Simon.
Nice.
Okay, I won't play any more of it, so that I don't get thrown off YouTube. So thank you, Masha, for it was just on the tip of my tongue. I knew it started with an S, the last name, but that's all I could get. Oh man.
What happened?
Well, what you need to look at the chat room notes, and you do that by going over here. Let me send you the link to the show, okay? And then when you do that, immediately make sure that the video is not playing, Rick, so that it doesn't start looping through, and it'll save your bandwidth as well. Okay. But if you go to the YouTube page, you can see some of the comments that people are making, and Pilot Pip is there, and he just made one that you're not going to be happy with at all.
Is that right? What's he saying now?
Let me see. Let me get back over here. I know this is behind the scenes, baseball. What do they call that?
Dugout.
Yeah. That's a term that people use, like stuff that's going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
And I'm going to send you via the group chat
Okay.
a link. And again, when you click on that link, make sure that the video that's on that page is you stop playing that video so we don't hear that. And then you'll see on the right side of the page the comments that some of the people that are on the page are making.
Okay. Yeah, there it is. So what do we got?
That's pretty.
And
That's pretty rude.
that is rough. But you know what? I can I can fix that with the quickness here. I'll show you how. We can go like this. There.
There we go.
How's that? No better?
Okay. Sorry about that. I couldn't help but bring that to your attention, sir. Okay. So now you can see what's going on in the chat room as well. Okay. Yeah, look at that. You hurt Miami Rick's feelings. I didn't even know he had any. Okay. So let's move on. I remember getting back to the question about the approach idle or flight idle or ground idle, or having the engine spooled up for faster spool up time in case you need to perform a miss or a mist, which is not MIST but MISSED. And in the T-37 trainer in the Air Force that I flew, the engines were notoriously slow to accelerate. And so we had something on there called thrust attenuators. And they were actually like little speed brakes that would actually protrude into the exhaust, the jet exhaust of the jet engines on that airplane. So you could keep the power up higher, but it kind of like almost like thrust reversers, but we called them thrust attenuators. So they go out into the thrust stream and kind of deflect it, and so you could have the throttles up at a higher setting, but you weren't getting pushed by the thrust of the engines. So that's
I've actually seen that on a lot of light business jets. They have that, and those thrust attenuators are characteristics of jet engines that have centrifugal type compressors.
Yeah.
Because of their very, very high spool up time. So it's better for you to have that power in, and that attenuator actually controlling some of that thrust. And then the second that you need them, then they get out of the way, and then you have the thrust available to you right away.
Yep, you're absolutely right, and that's exactly what the T-37 had. It had two centrifugal compressors. That the nice thing about that is, well, the bad thing is that they're not very powerful. The good thing is that you can throw just about everything but the kitchen sink at these engines, and they'll keep running.
Oh yeah,
they're very, very robust. We'd go out there on days when I was in the Air Force in pilot training, and if there was any even mention of ice, the T-38s would be immediately grounded, because those engines they were using in the T-38 were very, very sensitive to ice ingestion and just not doing well at all. Any kind of because it didn't have any kind of engine anti-ice system on it. And
no.
Yeah, the T-37s, we'd be up flying all day long in the ice. It didn't matter. It's like we were ice machines, ice makers. Okay, so moving on here. Next question deals with minimum runway required for takeoff and landing. Even though I know you get these numbers from dispatch, but for those working out the numbers the old-fashioned way, how do you go about it? In basic flight training, we were taught to work out the weight and then make sure that the runway length is long enough. I always work out the day's conditions and look to see how much weight I can have on the airplane. Which approach do you think is better? And then also I would like to ask about the 60% rule. Do only transport category aircraft have to use it, or do all jets? And I'm not even sure what that means. Also, if using RFI, runway friction index, do you add any additional margin for safety? Well, yeah. I mean, when these numbers are being computed for us, if there is some kind of a, I don't know if they use the runway friction index, but if there's any kind of we call it clutter, or at the end, if the runway is wet or cluttered, you have like standing water above a certain level, or if you have snow or slush or something like that on the runway. That's taken into account, because not only is it drag, but it's also, the friction that you have for stopping the airplane is significantly reduced, and so that's definitely something that is taken into account. But the way, in my experience, the numbers are calculated is that they will basically give you several numbers and several power settings based on the current conditions of the runways, and they'll show you you can use this power setting up to this weight, and they give you two weights, basically a runway allowable weight and a climb allowable takeoff limit or weight limit, where some places that we fly, you're okay with that weight on the runway, but because of the high terrain and the climb gradient that you have to maintain for safety, and for a loss of an engine, you are too heavy for that. So that's usually not a factor for most of the places that I fly. Usually the limiting number is the runway allowable takeoff weight, the RATOW, RATOW we call it. And again, so we are presented with these numbers, and we know what we actually weigh. Because they give us in the final numbers the zero fuel weight. We'll enter that into our flight management system, and based on the zero fuel weight and then adding the fuel that we have at the time to that number, then we get our actual weight. And then we look at the numbers that are presented to us from load planning, and we see that what power setting that we can use, and we try to use the least thrust possible, the lowest power setting possible for the conditions, because it just saves wear and tear on the engines. And also, I'm not sure if this is true, but I've heard this said many times, that the only time that we seem to have engine failures is when the engines are operated at the maximum, or not maximum, but the takeoff, the thrust setting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why you want to always, whenever possible, do what are called, and we've talked about this, do what are called either D-rated takeoffs or assumed temperature takeoffs, or a combination of both, because statistically the engine is going to fail. It's more likely to fail at higher power settings than lower power settings. And yeah, it's basically, we kind of do it the same way, Captain Jeff, basically working out the speeds. There's several ways that we can do that. One of them is these cards that you guys have. We also could work out speeds from what's called the performance section of the Quick Reference Handbook. Get speeds out of that. We have another document called the Takeoff Analysis Chart, which is it's basically a big white folder that has all the airports that we operate in and out of, with different temperatures and different runways, and we look at our speeds there. And then the fourth way we have is the actual FMC speeds, but the way that we really use the most is what's called the Onboard Performance Tool, which is it's software provided to us by Boeing, in which we enter all the variables, the weight, the wind, the temperature, the runway we're going to be using, the flap setting, what kind of thrust rating we're going to be using, whether it's a 10% D-rate, a 20% D-rate, any assumed temperature, method that we might be using. And it's interesting to consider here also that by law you can only derate up to and including 25% from your max rated takeoff. So you can take off with as little as only with as much as 75% thrust on that engine, and obviously with as little as 75% and as much as 100%. What you were talking about there, also interesting, on the initial climb out, we have to remember that the initial climb out of an airplane is divided into what's called 4 sectors, or 4 sections. The first one is from the moment you rotate the aircraft until the landing gear comes up. The most critical sector is the second one, and that is from the moment the landing gear comes up to the moment you start cleaning the airplane up. Basically means retracting flaps. And that is usually the most critical sector of the climb out, because that's where you are very close to the ground still and very close to any obstacles that are around you. So that's the critical one. The third one is when you clean the airplane up to clean airplane speed, which is the point at which you don't need any flaps anymore. And then the fourth sector is from clean airplane speed to 250 knots. So the critical one really is the second one, because that's when you're close to the ground, you got your power in, and you're very close in with your obstacles down near the ground. Another thing to consider here is the fact that when we take into account runway and speed calculations for runways, there what does a balanced runway mean? And these speeds that we get out of the QRH, the FMC, and many other sources are what are called balanced runway speeds. Basically what that means is that based on your conditions, the temperature, the runway length, the weight, the wind, and all these things, if you are to abort the takeoff at V1, which is your go, no-go speed, if you abort at V1, then that means that if you abort, you're going to stop at the end of that runway, and if you decide to go at that very V1 speed, if the runway is dry, you're going to cross the end of the runway at 30 feet if the runway is dry, and at 15 feet if the runway is wet. That's balanced field concept. When you're using computer programs like the onboard performance tool, like the Boeing company has, and I know Airbus they use another piece of software, I don't know what that is, that takes into account many more variables, and it has algorithms and things that basically fine-tune the calculation to such an extent that you're no longer dealing with balanced runway field theory there, which allows you to do a very interesting thing called an improved climb. And an improved climb basically means that you are delaying, the V1 remains the same, but your rotate speed is actually delayed, and what you're doing is you're having the airplane roll on the ground a little longer to gain that extra airspeed, so that your second sector, your second segment climb is going to be steeper, and it's going to keep you away from the ground even more so. But you can't just do that, thinking, well, I'm going to rotate now. You actually have to do that based on and supported by calculated airspeeds. And the last thing I wanted to point out here is that for takeoff speeds and abort speeds and V1s, the only braking method that is used is for the calculation is wheel brakes and spoilers. Reverse thrust is not factored in or considered. So, and not a lot of people know that. So it's interesting. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. What? Where am I?
You dozed off there.
Are we still on? Very, very interesting to some people. No, I'm just
Masha. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Masha. Let me go and say yes, Masha.
And actually, we're gonna actually call the cricket something different. I believe we have some feedback later in the show dealing with that. If my memory serves me, which it doesn't always in my advanced age. So good point. A lot of good stuff there. So just a quick question, Rick. I may have missed it in your discussion there about. When are your numbers actually calculated by you guys on the flight deck, or is it calculated by your FMC, or is it like in my scenario where it's sent to us via ACARS and we print it out and we use those numbers?
No, we get a load sheet from operations, and then we plug those values into the onboard performance tool, and then we calculate our own takeoff speeds.
Is that the same with the passenger operation as well?
Oh yeah, same.
Okay. Interesting. So basically, the way, I guess it differs at the various airlines out there around the world, anonymous, and but basically the way it's presented to me is that if you're at or below this weight, you can use this takeoff setting and these speeds. And if you're heavier than that, then you got to go to the next higher setting, et cetera. And then you have to take into account other factors that may not have been taken into account when the numbers were calculated. So I know that's not a very straightforward answer, but that we're doing our best to kind of give you an idea of how takeoff performance is calculated and and thought about in the air transport world. Just like, if you're flying general aviation, normally when you get, fuel in your airplane, you just fill it up, right? Or in your car, we don't go to the gas station and go, you know what, I think I'm only going to take on a third of a tank today because got to consider the weight and the weather and everything else. We go to the gas station usually if we have enough money. I'm not talking about when we're teenagers and we don't have any money, but now as adults, we will go to the gas station and fill up the tank to the top of the tank, right, until the thing cuts off.
That's right.
And we don't do that with airliners because, there are a lot of situations where you fill up the tanks, then you can't carry any passengers or cargo because it's just too much weight on the airplane for, well, so many different considerations. We can go off in so many different tangents.
Oh, yeah, we could.
Many things they look at, maximum landing weight, maximum takeoff weight, all this kind of stuff. So, okay, let's see. He goes on, or he or she, if anyone from the community can recommend a good way of getting into a lease for a microjet or a VLJ, very light jet, or a fractional arrangement. Perhaps someone who is part of such an arrangement can talk about their experiences, the pros, cons, and so on. Also, if someone could provide some advice as far as what kind of costs can be expected, along with how much one should set aside for maintenance and so on. Also, if anyone can provide any information on how much a type rating would cost and what would be involved for such an aircraft. As you can see, Captain Jeff, I'm very new to this and would love any and all information I can get. I apologize for the long feedback, but once I got to typing, it just got really long, really fast. And of course, we have to play this for that.
That's what she said.
Okay.
That is what she said.
Yes, I would send voice feedback, but quite honestly, I hate the way my recorded voice sounds. That's okay. You get used to it after you listen to your voice for a while, then it doesn't sound so bad anymore. Okay, and then he goes on to say, also love your new co-host on the show, both Dr. Steph and Miami Rick. Well, Dr. Steph, maybe not so much Miami Rick, are great. Would love to see, he didn't say that, I did that. Would love to see APG in my feed at least twice a week, even though I can only imagine how much extra work that would be for you. So there you go. And that is, I can't remember why, but he or she wanted to make that anonymous. So I hope we answered some of your questions there. And thanks for your feedback. And in an earlier episode, I don't remember which one it is now, we talked about Air Stig, and Grant from Down Under sent in this. It's great to hear from the legendary Air Stig, has graced your show with his presence. I've actually met the Air Stig, and I can attest to his wisdom and confirm that he frequently flies fast at very low levels. Smiley face. While the original Stig is indeed from Top Gear UK, we here in Australia are graced with a Stig who can travel in the third dimension, not just around a racetrack. Thus his nom de plume, Air Stig. Go us. Okay. This is still not clear to me at all what he's talking about. Okay, if you ever get down here to Australia, we'll try to arrange a meetup for you, as I'm sure he'd enjoy meeting you, as would the rest of us av geeks down here. So apparently Air Stig is really a real person somewhere down under. And yeah, that's cool. So thank you, Grant McCarran. Plane Crazy Down Under, a fantastic podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to it, what are you waiting for? All right. Let's do some more audio feedback. This one from Scott Willis.
Okay.
Hey, Captain Jeff and Miami Rick. My name is Scott from Woodstock, Georgia. I'm a private pilot and also a truck driver.
Yes.
Nice.
I wanted to give you a quick comment on the German wing suicide. I was thinking that he could have still committed suicide during takeoff and landing. So the whole security thing about having another person come in while the other pilot steps out to do whichever, that it'd be so easy just to cut the fuel off on takeoff or throw the yoke forward or any number of things during these crucial times of flight. Anyway, it's a good podcast and I sure enjoy it. Keeps me somewhat straight while driving around Atlanta in the traffic. Well, as always, tailwinds, clear skies, and all that other good stuff that you've heard about 100 times. Just make it a safe flight. Thanks for the podcast. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Scott. Remember when I used to play those all the time?
I like that one. That was
Gotten
really
out
cool.
of that. I need to remember to do that. Okay, CJ, the 130 pilot, C-130 pilot, sent this. He said, an audio response to some discussions about the utility of going to the altitude chamber for an airline pilot. Excuse me. So, well, he sent audio feedback. Let's let him talk about it.
Hey, Captain Jeff and the APG community. It's CJ, the C-130 pilot. I was listening to APG 167, where one of the discussions between you and Miami Rick was about the utility of altitude chamber training versus just talking about it in the classroom. It seemed that the agreement was that while the altitude chamber was valuable training, it was just way too expensive for each pilot to pay for its pilots to go to a chamber or to purchase and operate one themselves. Plus, of course, at least where I'm here on active duty, they require you to avoid scuba diving and flying around the time of the chamber flight due to issues people may have with the bends, which is where bubbles of nitrogen trapped in the bloodstream can expand and cause issues with joints or even with circulation, which is definitely not a liability that an airline wants to have. Then there's the issues with trapped gases, which can range from explosive exit from one's colon to unbearable tooth pain if there is an air trapped inside a filling. All sorts of physiological problems that an airline probably doesn't want to take the risk of causing on its pilots. However, when I went to the altitude chamber a few months ago, it wasn't in a chamber at all. I was surprised to see a device that was barely bigger than a large suitcase hooked up to an oxygen regulator. The pilot then strapped on an oxygen mask and put on one of those little O2 monitors that pinches your finger and sat in front of a PC flight simulator like X-Plane. What this device, called the Reduced Oxygen Breathing Device, does is reduce the partial pressure of oxygen that the pilot is breathing to approximately that which you would be breathing at 25,000 feet. The flight simulator and the associated heading and altitude test the instructor gave you to do substitute for the math problems and word searches you may remember from your altitude chamber days. The machine doesn't always reduce the amount of air you're breathing. It feels like you're breathing normally. It just reduces the amount of oxygen in that air. So after a few minutes, you find yourself having a hard time maintaining altitude and airspeed and heading and wondering why. And perhaps you notice some of the other hypoxia characteristics such as euphoria. I suppose the one thing that would be hard to see is the cyanosis on your lips, but you can see your fingers just fine. Anyway, once you recognize that you're hypoxic, you reach over and gang load to 100% oxygen and suddenly find your wits about you again. And the best of all, there's no risk of trapped gases or the bends since your body and lungs are all at ground level altitude the whole time. So how much does this experience cost? I looked it up on the GSA website. One of these devices can be had for a little over 20 grand. I'm not sure how much maintenance and operating costs are. I included a link to their site in my email. You can see it there that they tested on some Alaskan Airlines cabin crew and pilots with tremendously positive results. The majority thought that they should have annual exposure to hypoxia symptoms using the device. So anyway, I was wondering if you or Miami Rick thought that something like this might be a possibility for Acme Airlines to acquire and use. Who would you even talk to in your company if you wanted to see if anyone was interested in pursuing something like this? Is that a chief pilot thing? Well, as usual, shiny side up, brown side down, and kavu to you.
Well, thank you, CJ, the C-130 pilot. And, you know, I had no idea that they had these portable training devices that kind of simulate what you would experience in an altitude chamber. And it makes a lot of sense to get the same symptoms that you would get in an oxygen or an altitude chamber by just restricting the amount of oxygen that you're breathing. These again are not cheap. I think the units cost about $20,000, but when you compare it to what an altitude chamber costs, which is about $1 million, a lot less money. So looks like the Air Force is utilizing these a lot more. And what do you think, Rick? I think it'd be a great idea for airlines to get a couple of these units at their training bases. And
oh, absolutely. It's not a lot of people know this either. I mean, the airline pilots and the ones that have gone through the civilian pipeline, like myself, we've never been exposed to high altitude, hypoxia training. We've never been exposed to what are these? What is it, unstable?
Like
these maneuvers when you.
Yeah.
What is it? I can't think of it.
Unusual attitudes.
That's it. Unusual attitudes, that kind of stuff. So for us who have not had the exposure to this kind of training, I feel like it's something that would be really beneficial, really good for us to because it's interesting how you read about it, you know about it, you know how it works, you know what to look for, but then you've never experienced it, so you don't really know too much about it. And I've heard and I've read that you're not the one that realizes that you're being that you're becoming hypoxic. It's somebody else that sees it in you. So I wish that airlines took this a little bit more seriously. I wish mine did as well. And and I wish that this was a training that we had to go through, because any training, anything that you can use or to enhance your toolkit and your toolbox and learn more stuff, it's definitely something good. But then again, it costs money, and airlines don't like spending money. So I don't know.
You make a good point about the fact that hypoxia is insidious, and I think all of us, well, not all of us, but many of us can kind of relate to this in a different way, because when you imbibe too much alcohol, you are basically inducing hypoxia, a different type of hypoxia, but basically you're displacing oxygen from your bloodstream. And so if you've ever been out with a group of friends and you're the designated driver and they're drinking, and for whatever reason you're not drinking, you'll notice the people's they're changing, their attitudes are changing, their actions are changing, their behavior changes, and when you're drinking, you don't really perceive that, and but you do if you're not drinking. So it's the same kind of thing where, in a situation where you're experiencing hypoxia, you don't really understand that you are hypoxic, and so it's
exactly
good training.
Exactly right.
Good experience. All right, let me play this one here. It's called Running Through Fire.
Nice.
Thank you. You like that?
I like that. And I like the special effects.
Thank you. Well, Captain Don, let's see, Don Sebastian writes, "Hi, Commander Jeff, from Captain Don. Why? Well, because we should have had a chance to fly the space shuttle. I hired the Gulfstream G2 astronaut training pilot. They couldn't call the left seat captain and right seat first officer, so NASA upgraded the positions. So why can't I? That NASA pilot moonlighted as a CFI. He was used to deploying the thrust reversers on the G2 at 15,000 feet and hitting the runway as the space shuttle had to do. Worked out well. Got a Part 135 homing with 4 pilots. I'm not sure. Oh, got a Part 135 living with, I guess, with 4 pilots at minimum costs. The crew did the academics and tests online. Then the flight trained with the airplane they already had." Okay, so basically what Don is trying to communicate here is that, many of you listening are trying to figure, that you want to become airline pilots or professional pilots in some manner, many of you anyway. And but the big obstacle to so many of us, especially nowadays, is the amount of money that it costs to get, your ATP and all that kind of stuff. So this is a way, Captain Don, who, by the way, has been on several different aviation podcasts, and he's got a very a deep breadth of experience in mostly general aviation, but all kinds of aviation, actually. And I'll, if I get a chance, I'll try to put some links in the show notes with some of his interviews on other shows. So he's got a lot of experience, and this is an idea that he's come up with. And he said, here's a way for many of your listeners to get their ATP without taking a $125,000 mortgage on their life. Developed these figures from my 50 years of experience in general aviation. And he said, I like to call it very general aviation. Maybe we can discuss it live on one of your episodes via Skype or iPhone face-to-face. Well, maybe we'll be able to do that in the future and maybe go into a little bit more depth, Captain Don. But in the meantime, he kind of put out a bunch of figures here, and he said, go out and buy a Cessna 150 for $25,000, and then fuel for 1,480 hours, which is $46,000 and $46,620. That's a lot of money. But
that is a lot of money. Wow.
I guess the average price of fuel is around $5-6 a gallon, and then based on the fuel flow or fuel consumption per hour of a Cessna 150, you can basically roughly estimate your fuel cost over 1,480 hours as $46,620. Annual costs in other words, the maintenance annuals that you have to do on an airplane for 2 years, $3,500. Renting a twin, $2,500. Renting an instrument airplane for $3,000. Hiring an ATP with CFI, $1,500. Basically, comes up with a total of $82,420. And then he said possible deductions if you have friends that you can split the gas with, and so they can get some very expensive hamburgers. $16,000. You might be able to lower that. Get an airport dog. It's a free second in command. I'm not sure what he means by that. For $2,000, you can reduce. Resale of airplane. Basically, selling it for what you paid for it. $25,000. Airport volunteer services, another couple $1,000. Known expenses, $82,420. Expected recovery costs, $45,000. So you subtract it and you bring down the cost to about $37,420. So he said, his slogan and many of our slogans is where there's a will, there is a way. And so that's an idea, to one way to, I guess, go out there and get an ATP. Of course, it takes time, and I'm sure that many of you have kind of taken this kind of approach in the past. I don't know. What do you think about that, Rick?
I was looking at the possible deductions. I like the first one there. It says friends split gas to get hamburgers. $16,000. That's but seriously speaking here, I mean, the ones of us that actually had to go through the civilian way of getting our licenses and our tickets and all that stuff, it's rough at first. And I remember when I went through flight school, it was, we kind of did, we didn't all buy a plane and pool our money for the fuel and all that stuff, but we did have to live in a house. I went to flight school up in Orlando, in the Orlando area, just north of Orlando, in a little town called Sanford. And it was a bunch of us living in this big house, and this older gentleman owned the house, and I guess all his kids had moved away, and his wife had passed away, which is kind of sad. But he had a very nice house, very big house, a bunch of rooms, so it was all of us living in there, and rent was pretty cheap, and obviously we tried to be as frugal as possible, and we tried to get through flight training as quickly as possible, because also that meant that the quicker we got through it, then that meant that we didn't have to pay rent anymore, live up there anymore, and we could actually start getting paid for our flying, being instructors or whatever. So you do find ways to try to save as much money as possible and live as frugally as possible, which really puts this whole airline pilot thing in perspective, because once you're on the other side, and you see young pilots going through what you went through, you definitely feel for them. Like, for example, I'll be driving around South Miami. There's an airport down here called Tamiami Airport, which is a smaller airport. There's a lot of flight schools there, and I'll go down there every once in a while, because the FSDO's down there. They have I like to go down there. They have a really cool museum. It's called the Wings Over Miami Museum. So I like to go down there because they have a very big library, and I just like to go down there and geek out and read airplane books. And I'll see these guys and gals walking towards their flight schools in the middle of the day, and it's really sunny and hot outside. And I'm like, man, poor guys. They're probably going to start flying here in about another hour or two, and they've already been walking for half an hour in this sun. So I'll pick them up. I'll take them through their flight school, and if I see them coming out of flight school, I'll pick them. I won't let them walk back home. I'll take them with me, and I'll go get them a beer or whatever, and they'll drop them off at home and stuff like that, because I was there and I know what it's like to just be a broke pilot student, and it's really not cool. But it's all worth it because it's something that we love doing. And once you make it and you're actually on the other side, then you're like, you know what? It really was worth it because this is what I love doing and this is what I was born to do. And it's, you don't look at it as something negative, but you see it as something really positive. And I feel like that's the way you should look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, Don Sebastian was on the Inspired Pilot podcast, episode number 8, and I think he was also on an episode of the Airplane Geeks show as well. Not sure which number, but look him up and find out more about Don. Thank you, Don, for sending in the feedback. All right, next on the list is this from Ray Williams, my neighbor to the north in Alpharetta. As I mentioned in part 1 of this show, I talked about the fact that I am getting some of those beer glass and coffee mug orders shipped, and Ray was one of the recipients of the beer glass, and he said that he really loves it, and he sent this in his email to me, and it's a little, I don't know if it's a poem or just a little saying. If all be true that I do think, there are 5 reasons we should drink: good friends, good beer, or being dry, or lest we should be by and by, or any other reason why. So I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe he penned that. I don't know.
Really nice.
Yeah. So thank you, Ray. I'm glad you're enjoying the glass and the contents thereof. And let's see, Lynn, a good friend of mine, producer of the Catholic Weekend show that I do on Saturdays, sent this. I came across this story today, which was back almost a month ago. Thought it would be a cute story to share with the Airline Pilot Guy community. A 6-year-old boy accidentally leaves behind his one-of-a-kind stuffed tiger named Hobbs at the Tampa airport. Not only does the boy get the tiger back, he is also presented with a picture book of the adventures the tiger had during their separation. It is so nice of the Tampa airport employees to do this for this little boy. And then she sent me a link, which I'll include in the show notes, and you can see all the places that this tiger named Hobbs visited at the Tampa International Airport. And that was so nice. I mean, that's just one of those situations where it just makes you smile and makes you feel good about humanity.
Oh, yeah. That's a really feel-good story. That's really
and the
cool.
people that did it, you know, they probably had a great time doing it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so thank you, Lynn, for that. Okay, I got this, and you may have all seen this, and I don't know if we talked about it or not on the show. We should have mentioned it, and I don't believe we did. But did you see, Rick, the video of the Red Bull, the energy drink? Mm-hmm. And they're a sponsor of all kinds of extreme sports, including some pretty extreme flying and air races and that kind of stuff. Well, I received this from Dean Harmon, who is his title is digital producer for Red Bull Company Limited in London. And he said, "Good morning, Captain Jeff. We just flew 2 planes through a building, so I thought you'd want to see this first." And then he sent me a link to the video. And let's see here. Let me pull it up on. I think I have this on one of my tabs. So hang on here. Bear with me. I'm still trying to figure out this whole thing. Okay, let's see here. Got that running.
Not one day goes by
we have some.
That I don't give thanks that I got to do what I love to do. And
that is an ad.
I don't think that'll ever really settle.
Okay. So we'll have to wait for that to end.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Here we go.
I've never seen or heard of a full-motion flight through a hangar before, so we're hoping it will be a world first.
Long run in, super to the correction.
Barnstorming is the name of the video.
This is our 17th year flying as a pair. Every time I fly, I learn
See if
something.
I can share this with everybody.
Ultimately, if we get it wrong, we hit a building. So we're 1 nautical mile north running in now.
Nice.
We're going to be doing some hangar flights now. I'm ready to roll when you are. Yep, sir. We've got a long run MC, but for the correction. Okay.
Okay, for those of you listening, a couple Red Bull airplanes with the smoke pouring out the back, and they're at a very low level, and they go shooting right through an empty hangar. And now they're showing it in slow motion as they make their way through. What kind of airplanes are these, Rick? Do you know?
Those are extra 300s, I believe.
Okay. And they are very close to each other, and they are very close to the walls and ceiling and floor of this open hangar with doors open on either end.
See that all the bits were still there, and they were. So
to see if all the bits were still there, and they were.
I love that accent.
Me too. Me too. So anyway, a little glimpse of the video. If you want to watch the whole thing, then look for the link to it in the show notes. But I just think that's so cool that you know, we have people like Dean, you know, listening to the show, and I'm so sorry that I didn't see it right away. I believe this all was sent to me right about the time that my mom had passed away, and I was kind of not obligated, but I was busy with all the arrangements from my mom's funeral and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of let this slide. But anyway, Dean goes on to say that British pilots Paul Bonham and Steve Jones have become the first people in the world to fly planes in formation through a building in one of the most exhilarating aviation feats ever seen. The pilots who have been flying together for more than 17 years. Wow, I guess you really get a kind of a synced up together when you're flying together for that long. They used every ounce of experience they had as they descended to a height of just 1 meter above the ground to fly through a hangar measuring just 7.6 meters high, which is about 25 feet high, at more than 160 knots. As the, here you go, Extreme Air XA-41 plane flown by Jones and Bonham has a wingspan of 7.5 meters. The British duo also had just 10 meters either side of them as they flew through the hangar in North Wales. Anyway, very, very cool video. Thank you, Dean, for listening and possibly watching the show. And thanks for pointing us to this amazing video, which I'm sure all of the APG community members will have. If they haven't already seen it, I'm sure many of you already have. But if you haven't, you need to check it out. Anything you want to say about that before we move on?
That was outstanding flying. Wow.
Amazing. Let's see. Oklahoma City. Something happened here. Let me let Brian talk about it.
Hello, this is Brian from Katy, Texas, and I have a question for y'all. About a month ago that I heard that 2 Delta airline flights landed in Oklahoma City, and shortly after they landed, the airport was put under a seek shelter order due to tornadoes, and the two planes were basically left high and dry. And so my question is how dangerous would it be to be on a plane with a tornado in the vicinity, and what would you do in this situation? Almost seems like maybe an evacuation to get your people, your passengers off the plane into someplace safer, or is the plane the safest place for them? Sorry, I don't have the article, but I'm sure you can Google it and find it fairly quickly. I do understand that after about 15 minutes, the seek shelter was lifted for select people so that they could deplane the plane and get the passengers to a safer location. So clear skies, tailwinds, and whatever else you're supposed to say. Have a good day.
I don't know what you're supposed to say anymore. And great recording. In fact, you could hear the windshield wipers like rubbing against the windshield of his car.
Oh, is that what that was? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. So I did Google the article, as Brian suggested that I do. And to be fair, even though, again, here we have the journalists talking about the fact that these were Delta airplanes, Delta passengers, Delta flights, etc. And to be fair to Delta Airlines, it was not Delta mainline, but they were some of the feeder carriers that Delta hires to do some of the regional feeds. So, and you know, I understand the confusion because these airplanes are painted to look just like Delta Delta Airlines planes, and the uniforms look very similar. Their announcements make you think that you're flying on Delta, but you're not. So, just to be fair to that company, this was not actually Delta, but I think ExpressJet and maybe SkyWest. But anyway, regardless. Again, I'm not sure about the actual airlines involved here. So the point of this, I guess, is that, so what happens, you know, you get stuck out. This happens sometimes, Rick, you're probably familiar with this. You go to certain airports where they have a strict rule when it comes to lightning. I think Miami might be one of those places where, you know, all of a sudden you see the ramp crews just scattering and going into the building, and you're going, what's going on here? And they said, well, because of lightning in the area, they basically, you know, frozen the ramp, or, you know, basically said you can't be out there on the ramp working around the airplanes because there's lightning in the area.
Oh yeah, I've actually been inside of the American Airlines, the operations center here in Miami. I have a buddy of mine, he works there, and they have this, looks like a storm scope that has something like I forget if it's like a 20 or 25 nautical mile radius around it, and this thing actually depicts the point at where the lightning strikes have occurred, and if it's within that radius, then they basically clear out the ramp, and they're not allowed to go back out for a certain period of time. I forget exactly how long it is, but yeah, down here you don't mess around with lightning, man. It can really hurt you. So,
and other things that can hurt you are tornadoes. So
yeah,
in Oklahoma, they get a lot of them. And I guess this was a situation where there was a tornado warning, which meant that tornadoes were either visually sighted or sighted on radar. And they basically told everybody at the airport, you know, seek cover. I think there was some miscommunication that went on here. I don't know if some of the people really understood that there were still passengers on these two separate flights that were on the ramp approaching the gates or not, but you know, leaving them on the airplane. The question is, well, is that a safe place to be in a tornado or not? And I'm not sure I have a definitive answer about this, but I do know that if you're in an airplane and you're strapped in, you have your seatbelt on, it's even if you get hit by a tornado, I would imagine that might be safer than if you were just out there on the ramp or under a tree or something like that. But probably not as safe if you were underground somewhere in the terminal, you know, in a shelter area. But you know, I would say that, I don't know. What do you think, Rick?
I think that, yeah, I kind of tend to have the same thought process as you here. If you're strapped in an airplane and you're protected, I guess, by the fuselage and, you know, whatever else is around there, then that's better than, you know, being out there in the open and then having one of these things pick you up and slam you against the ground or whatever. So yeah, better be strapped in an airplane than to be walking around down there on the ramp, I think. I don't know.
One of the passengers said, I thought, oh my gosh, if this does come here, it will probably disintegrate around us. I guess she's talking about the airplane. This passenger said the pilot told passengers that they could unbuckle their seatbelts and walk around the cabin. But she advised a fellow traveler that probably was not a good idea. I said, and I'm thinking while I'm reading this, why would the captain or the pilot say that? I mean, I would say, make sure everybody, you keep your seatbelts fastened because we might be in for a wild ride. This passenger said to a fellow passenger, I said, if I were you, I would put it back on. So anyway, we have that. That's a good question. One that I have not really thought about until seeing this story where the passengers are kind of stranded out there. And I think when one of the officials at Delta realized that the airplanes were still out there with passengers aboard, they were able to get some people out there to bring them into the gate and get the passengers off the airplane and into the shelters. So
That goes to prove that not everything is written down in the manuals.
Yeah. Right. You
Very-
can't think of everything.
Yeah, who's gonna think of that? You know?
It's now in the manual. So anyway, so that was a great question, Brian, regarding, airplanes and tornadoes. Well, Craig writes, I know it's been a while since I last talked to you. It's been a very busy semester and beginning to the summer. I may have bit off more than I can chew this past semester, taking 19 credit hours and also doing CFI training. Let's see. Today, I'm happy to tell you that I am now a certified flight instructor. Yay, there's the applause. Congratulations, Craig, on
Congratulations.
becoming a CFI, Certified Flight Instructor. I have an interview with Liberty University, the school I attend, next week. Of course, he sent this to me middle of last month. I'm planning to graduate in December, and so I also hope to work part-time and finish up school at the same time. Then once I've graduated, finish up getting my hours and start applying to the regionals. I'm looking into Air Wisconsin and Piedmont as my first two choices. I say this for quality of life reasons. I would love to live close to home, which is Baltimore, Maryland, and most bases for these airlines are within a close boarding state area. Also, bordering, I guess he means. Also, the pay and benefits seem pretty nice. If you have anything to say about these or other regionals, or if the APG community has any input, I'm all ears. I'd love to get one of your pint glasses because I already have a plethora of coffee mugs. Okay, Craig, I think I have you on the list. Haven't got to you yet, though. Sorry. And he said, P.S. I'm going to try to attend the Innovations of Flight event this weekend. Hope to see you and other APG community members there. Well, I didn't see Craig there, and I don't know if he probably didn't make it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So sorry we missed you if you were there, Craig. We did end up actually going there, and one of the episodes that we recorded up there, one of our episodes we recorded while we were there. Well, not actually at the National Air and Space Museum, but at a hotel nearby.
Yep.
So again, congratulations, Craig, on the rating, and hope to meet up with you sometime soon. Good luck with your studies. And if anybody out there has any suggestions or advice for Craig regarding, Air Wisconsin, Piedmont, or other regionals he might want to look into, please send it to us and we'll get it to him.
Before we move on, I wanted to say that obviously going to congratulate you on your new rating, and you're going to see and you're going to realize now that you're a CFI and you're going to teach other people how to do this thing we love to do so much, which is fly. I feel like it is now that you are really going to learn to fly, because I feel like I didn't really know how to fly until I was able to teach it to somebody else and get that message across. And you're going to be able to see things from another perspective and think at things from look at things from another point of view, and actually get to act and get to be the pilot in command of that airplane, because it's not only you now in the airplane, it's you, the airplane, and the person you're teaching to fly. So it's really interesting. It's going to be it's a beautiful part of every pilot's career to actually get through being an instructor and teaching other people to fly. You'll really learn that this is really when you're going to learn to fly. So
yeah,
congratulations and enjoy it.
You know what they say, if you really, really want to learn something, teach it to other people. Right?
Absolutely.
All right. James Chen from Toronto writes, am I correct in thinking that the oxygen level in the cabin to maintain certain cabin altitude, let's say 8,000 feet, is dependent on the engine compressor rotating at a certain N1 or EPR or EPR? During normal descent of 1,500 feet per minute, it takes 19 minutes to get to flight level 100 from flight level 380. That's 19 minutes. I remember experts saying that useful consciousness at these altitudes are under a minute. So if there is a minimum N1 or EPR you have to maintain is there one to maintain during descent to ensure that the compressors are pumping enough bleed air into the cabin to prevent hypoxia? So he goes on with a another. Let me just basically set this straight. We're not maintaining certain N1 or EPR settings on the engines to maintain the pressurization and the climbs and the descents of the system. It's an automatic controller that's doing all that, and it does that with sensors in the cabin measuring the altitude and then also sending signals to a pressurization valve that is opening and closing to maintain the pressure at a certain point in the cabin. And so it is true that in certain airplanes like the one that I fly, if you're at idle power, you're not putting out as much bleed air, or not as much bleed air is being tapped from the compressor sections. And so the air conditioning units are not putting out as much air. And in that case, the automatic pressurization controller will start closing that port in the airplane's hull to maintain the pressurization as best it can. And so it does have a better chance of maintaining pressurization at higher power settings, but they're designed so that even at idle power, that pressurization can, or at least a certain descent rate can be maintained by the system, again utilizing the outflow valve. So I guess that's what you're asking about there, because
that's how I saw it. And usually the climb is the automatic pressurization controller keeps a climb of about 500 feet a minute and a descent of about 300 feet a minute. And basically the way it works is that the airplane is going to keep that climb of 300 feet a minute until you reach your maximum delta P, what it's called, your maximum differential pressure between the inside of the fuselage and the outside air. So once you get to that delta P, that max delta P, which in most transport category airplanes is about 8.5 psi, once that value is reached, then the delta P is going to maintain. It's going to stay at 8.5, and as the aircraft continues to climb, then the only thing that can actually, the only value that can keep changing is the cabin altitude. So that's why the delta P is constant, but the cabin altitude keeps rising as the aircraft altitude keeps rising. And then it works the same way on the way down. The delta P will start at 8.5 because it's spin at 8.5 the entire time, and as the aircraft begins to descend, the controller is gonna command about a 300 foot per minute descent to maintain that 8.5 psi delta P until you get to an altitude where that's no longer a factor. And then once you get on the ground, that weight on wheel switch again, that little sensor in the landing gear, is gonna completely open the outflow valves so that the pressure inside is the same as the pressure outside, and you're able to open the doors, because as we all know, passenger airplanes, the doors are plug type doors, so you first need to move them in and then outwards. And if there's any residual pressure in the aircraft compared the inside to the outside, then you're not going to be able to open the door because there's pressure pushing that door against the frame of the aircraft. So it's a matter of the controlling factor here is the delta P, and keeping that delta P constant, and then having the cabin altitude change with relation to the altitude of the aircraft itself. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly here.
It's kind of complicated. It's hard to wrap your head around it. Another term for delta P, we don't use delta P, we use PSID.
Okay.
For pounds per square inch differential, which is the same thing, delta P. Basically, as Rick states, the pressurization controller will do its best, modulating that outflow valve to maintain the cabin at certain altitudes and a certain descent rate. In my airplane, the rate of climb and rate of descent is adjustable, but the index setting is at 500 feet per minute. And of course, the 777's a different airplane, a different pressurization system, different capacity or capability of the engines, etc. So anytime that the cabin altitude, you can almost think of these as two separate things: your cabin altitude and the real altitude of the airplane. And that automatic pressurization controller is always trying to maintain that cabin anywhere from 0 to about 8,000 feet, a little bit lower than that if you're flying on the Dreamliner. And then once it reaches that maximum differential pressure, that's all it can do. And that's one of the reasons why some airplanes are limited to certain altitudes, based on the fact that the maximum pressure differential is this, and this is as high as you can go to keep the altitude at this level. So you have the partial pressure of oxygen is enough to keep everybody conscious. Again, typically around 8,000 feet. And if for some reason the engines or the pressurization system is not able to keep the cabin altitude at that point, and the cabin starts to climb higher than that, I believe it depends on the airplane, but going through about 10,000 feet on a lot of airplanes, all of a sudden there's going to be a very obnoxious noise going off in the cockpit, warning you that the cabin altitude is at or above 10,000 feet. And then as the altitude in the cabin continues to climb, if you've not done something to counteract it, then at a certain point, a certain trigger altitude, the oxygen masks drop. But anytime you are getting into that territory where the altitude warning horn is sounding, not altitude warning, but the cabin altitude warning sound is on, you're in trouble. You need to do something quickly, and usually that means an emergency descent. And we don't descend at 1,500 feet per minute if we're doing a rapid. If we have a depressurization event, we come down very, very fast.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's two considerations here. The first one is, if it's a problem with one of the outflow valves, which basically means that it's not a structural problem with the aircraft, and we depressurize because the outflow valves failed and they basically just opened up and let all the pressurized air out, then we'll do a descent at what's called VMO or MMO. VMO is maximum speed and velocity, and MMO maximum speed and Mach. So we'll basically maintain the aircraft at maximum speed with the speed brakes out, trying to get down as fast as possible. Keeping in mind, obviously, terrain outside and all sorts of things. And in many places where I fly, we have what are called escape routes, just for this very reason, so that in case we have a depressurization, we know what airway to take or what section to descend into, and do kind of a step descent. We can't go down to 10,000 feet initially, but we'll go down to 15, 20,000 feet, and then down to 15, and then down to 10,000. Now, if it's something that is structural, if the aircraft actually has a hull blown out, then we'll do the descent maintaining that speed, and that's what's at least that's what we do on the airplane that I fly. So if the failure happened at 320 knots indicated, then we'll do the entire descent at 320 knots indicated, and obviously try to limit high maneuvering loads to not incur further damage on the fuselage, and then get down there quicker and that way. As far as the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, that remains constant at 21% no matter where you are. It's always 21%. The only thing that changes, as Captain Jeff said, is the partial pressure of that oxygen. The higher you go, the less pressure, so your respiratory system is less able to absorb that oxygen into the alveoli of the lungs. But the 21% oxygen ratio remains the same no matter where you are in the atmosphere.
Exactly. So hopefully, James, that shed some light on the question that you had regarding pressurization. It's a little bit more complicated than we have more time to spend on the show, but hopefully that helped. Somebody named Dr. Steph sent in.
Who's that?
I don't know, but let's see. She sent.
Let's move on then.
What's that?
Let's move on then.
Okay. She said, in case no one has seen this or sent this yet, and then she sent a link to this amazing stunt pilot, or I guess acrobatic pilot. Her name is Svetlana Kapanina.
Yep.
And here, let me show you a little bit of this video here. She's over, I think, somewhere in Russia. Where did they have the Olympics?
The Ukraine?
Yeah. What was the name of that city again? I've already forgotten. anyway, that's where I think she's performing this air show. This is a very boring part of the show, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it. But I'll put a link to it in the show notes. This lady does amazing things with this this airplane. So thank you, Dr. Steph, for pointing us in that direction, and we do appreciate it. Oh, here's a good one. Moving on to Steve's email. Let's see here. I'm trying to get back to my screen, and pardon the interruption. Here we go. There I am. The airline pilot guy community member named Steve sent this. I am a newly minted captain. Here, let me see if I can share this with the rest of the crowd that might be watching the video. I think you'll appreciate this. It's a kind of a photo montage of some pilots. And let's see, did I do that right?
Yep, I see it.
Okay. Back here to my Evernote, if I can. Here we go. I'm a newly minted captain for a large regional airline in the U.S. I spent 8 years learning as a first officer, so I feel very comfortable in my new role as supreme leader of the cockpit. But when I step out of the cockpit, I have a slight problem. I can't grow facial hair. This has come as a stunning revelation since dealing with stressful customer interactions. I find that my words do not have the same clout as those flung from behind a mustache do. Lacking the appropriate facial follicle manifestation, I feel the imposter. What is your advice? Sincerely, Slick Lip Steve. And again, he sends this photo montage of several famous captains with mustaches of various degrees or varying degrees, including what's this? Alec Baldwin when he plays the airline pilot character on the Saturday Night Live show. And let's see, who else do I? Sully Sullenberger there.
Who's that guy on the lower right? I
don't know. Some imposter, I think. Anyway, so very funny, Steve. The mustache thing. I don't know. What would be your advice, Rick, for that? I mean, you're not growing. Well, Rick just grows facial hair. He's grown like almost a full beard while we've been talking, starting recording the show. He seems to have a very full beard. How many times do you have to shave per day?
Just once, but and actually, I really don't shave unless I have to go flying. I don't like flying with facial hair on. Even when I sat on the left hand side, I didn't feel like
right. You're not a captain now, so you don't need to have the
exactly. So now I just shave it all off. You know, the second I go back, I'll look just like Les have been there. So yeah.
In a related, thank you, Steve. That was very funny. I don't know. The best thing we can do is maybe get one of those fake mustaches. You can get them at Costume Supply.
Yeah, you can get that with the nose and the eyeglass combo. You know.
Oh yeah, that's always a good addition as well.
You want to be taken seriously, do that.
And I received a voicemail from a good friend of mine who used to be my choir director a few years ago. And this kind of ties in with mustaches. Take a listen.
Hey, Jeff, it's fun. It's Thursday evening, about 5:30. God, I saw your picture there in the cockpit with that Playboy bunny in between you and some other pilot. Now I know what you look like without that little mustache you take on and off when you have to go incognito. I understand. Yeah, I'm sorry you lost your job over that, but I'm sure you found another bird to fly at this point. Okay, touch bases. Hope you're doing well. Bye-bye.
Yeah, he is a funny guy, and I always enjoy getting phone messages from Bernie. Okay. Bob Pring writes, so what will happen to your Mad Dog when it retires? Cut up for scrap and salvaged, flown out to the Mojave Desert to sit for years, or maybe, just maybe, sold to an airline in some third world country? Well, not always. Check out this video of an MD-87 that has been repurposed as a firefighting tanker. This one is being used for a fire here in Southern California and is taking off from a field you're familiar with, San Bernardino International, formerly known as Norton Air Force Base. During the takeoff roll to the west, you can see the smoke from the fire in the background. He has a link to that video. I could only guess at the training these guys go through to fly low and slow over rugged mountain terrain. No automation dependencies here. Good old stick and rudder skills only. This could be your next gig.
There you go.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun, actually. So, and he's not the only one that sent me a link to this as well. Andy did, and he said he thought you might be interested in this video of the MD-80 series fire bomber. He said, I didn't realize that they made this conversion. I didn't either. So I just wouldn't think that the airplane would be suitable for that kind of a role. But
I've seen Hercules. I've seen DC-10s, and now I've seen this Mad Dog as a firefighter. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So thanks to both of you, Bob and Andy, for sending in that link, and I'll include that in the show notes so everybody else can watch that MD-87 taking off out of San Bernardino International Airport. Let's see. Robert Zwerdling, sent me something regarding going green, and of course that means we have to do.
Yes.
Going green.
Is that the first time I've played it on the show?
It is.
Been on? Oh, okay.
We're gonna take care of the earth. We're
We're going green.
I played it a couple times with Dr. Steph last night.
Okay, cool.
We're going
But
green.
you can't really get enough of that, I think.
I can't.
No.
It's awesome because just you think you have it out of your head, and then you play it again, and then you're stuck with it for another week. So it's awesome.
Yeah, well, he sent me this link to a movie of the electric green taxiing system. And I think we've talked about this on previous shows, ways, some ideas that some companies are coming up with to kind of save fuel costs and to save the environment by using electric motors to propel the airplane on the ground and keep those jet engines off for as long as possible, either going out or coming back in from a trip. So this is one of the companies that is using this technology, electric green taxiing system. And we'll hopefully have a link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you, Robert. Steve writes in with some 777 and MD-88 questions. Oh, he is asking both of us, I guess. Hope this finds you and your family well. Hope you were all able to go to the IAD meetup. We did, and had a great time. We did. Hopefully the weather was better than here in New York. I was just flying a 777 on my sim, and I was hoping you could run a few questions through the portable Boeing database, also known as RIC. Hi, Rick. Before anything else, thank you for your contributions to the show. Of course, Captain Jeff is great solo, but you, Captain Jeff, and Dr. Steph make a great flight crew. My questions are, first, is it a requirement to shut the ADIRU off when you're parked, or only if it's overnight or several hours? Also, how long does it really take to align? Lastly, is there a seatbelt sign switch on your flight deck? Some of the cargo 777s on my sim have seatbelt signs or electronics off signs. Others do not have either. Do you think that they all have no smoking signs, which is good since smoking cargo would always be bad?
Yep.
Thank you in advance for your help. And I'm attaching a photo of my 777 of choice for today. Oh, look at that! It's
that is a handsome looking airplane. Look at that.
Cargo 777 freighter. Wow.
And it's 774. That's the one that I was checked on when I first got on the airplane.
Oh, very cool.
Nice.
So he has a question for me as well, but let's tackle the 777 question.
Let's tackle the 777. So for you guys and gals who don't know what the ADIRU is, that stands for Air Data Inertial Reference Unit, which is the system that we use to tell the airplane where it is and where all the primary and some secondary instruments get their information from. No, it's not a requirement to shut the ADRUs off or the ADRUs off at the end of each flight. Actually, when we do multi-sector flights or multi-leg flights, we'll run through the shutdown checklist, and we'll actually skip the secure checklist, which is the portion of the checklist that actually brings you to shut the ADRUs down. We'll only shut them down at the end of the day, at the end of the flight, and only we only shut it down after we send all the required ACARS messages to the company, because the ADRUs need to be aligned for the ACARS system to be able to uplink the messages that we need to get sent out before we shut it down. The messages that we send out are the arrival report message, which basically is tells the company what time we landed, what runway we landed, if we used reverse thrust, if it was a category 1, 2, or 3 ILS, if it was a model land, stuff like that. We'll also send messages regarding who did the takeoff, who did the landing, and we'll also send a message of who was the piloting command, their employee number, what time he took over the airplane, what time he relinquished control of the airplane, and the number on the flight log on the book. So we need to send those messages out before we shut the ADRU off for the day. And then when we turn it on the first flight of the day, it takes 10 minutes to align the ADRU. I remember on the 767 it was the same, but the interesting thing about the 767 ADRUs, which were on the upper left portion of the overhead panel, the 777 is as well, but on the 767 you actually had a little keypad up there with 3 knobs, because you have the left, the center, and the right RUs. And when you set those to the align position, the display would say 7. It would basically count down from 7. It wouldn't display a 10 because the LED up there would only go up to 7. So it displayed 7 for 3 or 4 minutes, and then it would count down 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But it takes 10 minutes on both the 767 and the 777. On the 777, on the actual navigation display, you have a counter that counts down from 10 minutes. Letting you know how much longer the system has until the ADRU platforms are aligned. As far as the seatbelt signs, well, on the 777s that I fly, we do have a seatbelt sign selector or a knob up there, but it doesn't say seatbelt signs. It says supernumerary signs. It says SUPRNY or something like that. It stands for supernumerary. And supernumerary are basically the guys and gals that sit in the back that we might be flying that day. Sometimes we fly with animals, so the vets sit back there, the doctors sit back there, the cargo handlers sit back there. Sometimes we'll take mechanics with us, or dispatchers, or just people that aren't pilots, so they'll sit in the back, and we need to have that sign there so they know when to put their seatbelts on and off. And well, that was it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that was it. Good.
So now on to my 88 question. The MD-88 I have on my sim doesn't like when I start the APU and then get the plane set up for flight. When I start the engines, after the APU is on for a while, I get a hot start. I have retrained myself to stay on ground power until I'm ready to go, which is probably best for fuel consumption anyway, and is also probably what happens in the real world. Just wondering if that's accurate, or if I've destroyed several engines for nothing. Thanks, as always, for all of your hard work and great shows. Be safe, Steve M. That must be a simulator, a simism, because no, I mean, just because we're running the APU for a while, we don't get any hot starts. So must be something else. I don't know what's going on there. So no, we don't have that. In fact, starting with the APU is the normal way we start, and that is usually the best way to start the engines, as opposed to getting an external starting device and etc.
Maybe if the duct pressure is low, or
yeah, that's one of the things we checked for when we turn off the air conditioning to the cabin for engine start. By the way, that's why all of a sudden, as you're pushing back and the airplane starts getting really warm really fast, well, because we need to divert all that bleed air to the engine starter to get the engine started. And so that's why it gets kind of warm there for a short period of time. And when that happens, we look up at a little pneumatic pressure gauge to make sure that we have enough pneumatic pressure to start the engine. So that's one of the things I would look for in your simulator, that when you turn the air conditioning system, the packs off, and make sure that the outflow or the cross feed valves are open. Not cross feed. What do they call it? Pneumatic
Cross bleed
valves, cross bleed valves or whatever, open or up. And then you should look for that pneumatic pressure to be above a certain value so that you know you're going to have enough air pressure to spin the engines and not get a hot spot.
because I'm thinking that might be it. He may be not. I mean, I've never flown the Mad Dog, but I'm thinking that maybe it's a duct pressure problem. He's not getting enough duct pressure from the APU to the engines. That might be
right. You got to make sure you turn those air conditioning packs off. So maybe that's the problem. I don't know. That's the best I can do to help you with that. Thanks, Steve, for your feedback.
Yeah, thanks.
Mike sent us some audio feedback, and it has to do with flight sims. And he has a picture of his home setup here, along with a Sam Adams summer ale, looks like. And he's got his cockpit view on his computer screen and a joystick, etc. So let's hear what he has to say.
Hey, Captain Jeff and crew, this is Dispatch Mike calling to give some voice feedback to Knick Knack Jack about the simulation community, what I thought about flight simulators and all that good stuff. Knick Knack Jack, I've played flight simulators since I think I've been the age of 7, maybe 8. Me and my best friend used to take off from Meigs Field in Flight Simulator. I think 95 was my first edition. And we take off from Meigs Field in a Cessna, and we literally fly in between the buildings of Chicago. And that's how I first got started in literally playing with airplanes. And to me, that really turned out to be a great benefit for me. When I went for an introductory flight lesson at my local airport that my aunt got me for my birthday, the flight instructor knew that I had actually flown before because I had a good instrument scan. I could maintain altitude and speed and all of that already, and I had never actually flown a real airplane before. So flight simulators are great. And actually currently right now I'm giving this feedback while I'm playing my Flight Simulator 10. I'm flying a 747 in between Guam and Osaka, Japan. And there's some things that flight simulator pilots can do that real pilots can't do. For example, we can turn the simulation rate up. I am currently flying at 8 times speed. So I'm doing Mach 8.5, but I'm really doing 8 times Mach 8.5. So this flight between Guam and Osaka is going to take me maybe about 10, 20 minutes. In reality, in real life, it's a 3-4 hour flight. Another thing that we can do is, we can drink beer while we fly our airplanes. And I just get off a shift, about ready to go to bed. So sitting back, having a nice cold beverage while I'm watching the 747 fly itself up there. So I love flight simulators. I think they're great. I think they're a great introductory tool for people to get into aviation, or for me who has a certificate and really can't afford to fly right now on my own anyway. It keeps me sharp. It keeps me flying for that day in the very near future when I do get back into the air piloting an aircraft. I won't have as much rust on me. So Jeff, Rick, and everyone else, I always enjoy the show. Keep up the great work, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Dispatch Mike, for that feedback regarding simulators, flight simulators. It's very cool. And he's right. You know, we're not allowed to be drinking beer while we're flying the real airplane. That's one of the advantages of flight sims.
I like that. He was doing like Mach 8 while drinking a beer. That was awesome.
Very cool. I guess you could be drinking a beer and flying some of these military jets too, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your simulator. All right, Nigel writes, let's see, Belfast Airport, Chicago flight diverted after Nuts Row. Okay, let's see. I think I might have a clip on my browser dealing with that. If I can find it, let's see, maybe it's this one right here. Waiting.
This is the aircraft involved in the incident on the ground at Belfast International Airport at the weekend. Coleraine Court was told passenger Jeremiah Theed became aggressive after being refused nuts and crackers during the flight. He stood up while the seatbelt sign was still on and asked for the snacks. And when he was refused, he began shouting and was abusive to cabin crew. This led to the United Airlines flight from Rome to Chicago being diverted to Belfast. This is how the story was reported on American television.
A travel nightmare ends tonight for some passengers at O'Hare. Their flight from Rome was diverted because of an unruly passenger. Passengers arrived home tonight at O'Hare Airport after a 21-hour delay in Ireland.
The flight crew had to dump 50,000 litres of fuel before they could land in Belfast. 269 passengers spent nearly 23 hours at the airport. Some spent the night lying on the floor.
There were people literally sleeping on the conveyor belt with the baggage.
Okay, so you get the picture. Another case of I should have played this. Of people acting badly. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the TSA, does it?
No. Not necessarily.
And so this guy gets upset because he didn't have any nuts and crackers. I hope that they give him lots of nuts and crackers in his jail cell.
They do.
Anyway, so thank you, Nigel, for that, I guess. All right. Andreas. He says, hi, Captain Jeff and co-hosts. Andreas from Sweden here, although I should say the other Andreas, since I remember hearing feedback on the show from a namesake of mine. Maybe I should get myself a cool name, too, like Miami Mike. Or was that Rick?
Miami Mike's at the beach today. He's hanging out there drinking pina coladas.
Anyway, first a shout out to Swedish Jim with congratulations on the driving license. I'll be sure to keep a lookout for that red BMW when plane spotting around Arlanda Airport. In fact, I was on my way there just the other day when airport operations shut down for 30 minutes due to someone flying a drone near the incoming aircraft. Duh. It seems that finding ways for these very different types of aircraft to coexist seems more urgent than ever. Yeah, absolutely. So to my question regarding flight instruments and the sensors that feed them, watching TV shows like Air Crash Investigation, I've noticed quite a few accidents where various faults in the instruments and or sensors led the pilots to not realize that their aircraft was pointing up at a dangerously high angle or banking heavily. This seems to be especially true in situations where the problem was affecting the attitude indicator. Would it be a good idea to have a completely passive mechanical type of attitude indicator in the cockpit, such as a floating compass or some other type of self-leveling indicator? I'm thinking that that would at least give you a rough idea of the aircraft's attitude to help you maintain level flight while sorting the situation out. Mostly for sentimental value, we keep an old ship's compass in my family's leisure boat. I don't use it as a reference to see if we're listing the boat small enough so you'd feel it. And there's always the blue stuff there as a quite distinct visual reference. But once calibrated to sit level, it does give you a rough idea of any angle or lean. Tailwinds, nice beer, and all that. Although not at the same time. Well, thank you, Andreas, the other Andreas. Hey, you know what? Great idea. And guess what? They actually do have what you described as a good idea to have in airplanes. Now, I know that more modern airplanes, Rick can kind of talk about what exactly they have for standby attitude indicators in his airplane. And not his is probably not a real mechanical version, or maybe it is. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but I can tell you that in my airplane, we have like a separate standalone unit that's in the instrument panel, and it's completely mechanical. It has its own gyros, and it's there for an emergency if you need to have an attitude reference. What about you, Rick?
Well, basically, we have, just like we talked about the ADRs, the ADRUs being the primary system for attitude and a bunch of other things. We have a secondary system called the SARU, S-A-R-U, which is the Secondary Attitude Reference Unit. And that unit feeds attitude information to a device called the IFSD, the Integrated Flight Standby Display, which is like a small PFD, like a small primary flight display like the one you'd have in front of you, but it's sitting on the left-hand side between the captain's navigation display and the top ICAS, engine indicating crew alert and system screen up there. That's on the newer 777s. The older 777s actually had 3 separate instruments there. They're all, liquid crystal displays. The top one was the attitude, the middle one was the airspeed, and the bottom one was the altitude, or the other way around, or the middle one was the altitude, the bottom one was the airspeed. I don't remember because I've never flown one with that setup there. But you do have standby instruments, and these are always taken in readings, and the sensors have nothing to do with the primary instruments at all, and airplanes need to be certified this way, because if you lose your primary attitude sensors, then you need to be able to know which way the airplane's pointing it. Also, I remember one time it happened to me. I was doing a test flight on a 7.6 right after they installed the winglets down in Santiago in Chile, and as we were taxiing out to the runway to go do this test flight with the winglets on, I noticed that as we started taxiing towards the runway, the horizon line on the integrated standby flight display, which the 767s also have, you could actually see that the instrument was starting to show a bank while we were taxiing. Both the main attitude indicator on the left-hand side and the right-hand side were indicating correctly, but the alternate one was not indicating correctly, and that is a no-go item. So we had to, basically put the stops on the flight there, turn back around, go back and park it, because you cannot fly with an standby instrument not working, because it's there for that very reason. So yeah, we do have that on board.
Yep. And ironically, though, many or most or maybe all of those incidents that you're referring to, where there were faults in the instruments and or sensors leading the pilots to not realize that the aircraft was pointing up or banking heavily, almost every one of those situations that I can remember, the attitude indicators, the primary attitude indicators, were working. They were they were giving good data to the flight crews. And so having a standby attitude indicator, I don't think would have done any good. But I could be wrong about that. But I mean, several of the recent ones, loss of control incidents, there was absolutely nothing wrong. For instance, Air France 447, there was nothing wrong with the attitude indicator. That's why we preach control performance concept. You know, if you're in a situation where your airspeed is going bonkers and it's unreliable, then you set a certain pitch picture in your attitude indicator and a certain power setting, and guess what? The airplane's going to fly just fine until you resolve whatever the situation is with whatever sensor or instrument that is having a problem.
And then these newer systems are actually going to tell you, well, there's and the older systems have this as well. They have what are called attitude comparators, which basically, and you spoke about that a couple episodes ago. One of your attitude indicators in one flight that you were flying that day happened to fail, and then on the newer airplanes, these attitude comparators are going to do just that. They're going to compare the attitude between the left primary flight display and the right primary flight display, and if there's a difference between them, there's going to be a message generated letting you know that one of the two PFDs is not working properly. So then what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to look at yours, or you're supposed to look at the other one, and then compare that one to the standby one, because the standby one is receiving information from a completely different source. Mm-hmm. And basically you're able to isolate the defective one that way, and then continue the flight on that way. And if it happens on the ground, then it's obviously a no-go situation, so you can't leave. But it's there. It's there just for that reason.
And at Acme, we call those comparators.
Comparators?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we call things different things. Moshe, I'm trying to hurry now because I'm realizing that we've hardly made a dent in the feedback, and we're probably already around getting close to 3 hours total.
Wow. Okay.
Not for the feedback portion, but for the entire show. So we'll continue to accelerate here. Moshe from Israel here. Love the show. Always learn a lot from it. A question has recently come up, and I've been unable to find an answer in the Boeing FCOM FCTM. I hope that you and or the Miami Wikipedia might have an answer. When performing a Category 2, Category 3 approach with Autoland, what are you supposed to do if the flare annunciator doesn't turn green? The way I see it, there are 3 options, each with pros and cons, and keep in mind you're less than 50 feet from touchdown at this point from
There we are.
Hey, he's back.
It said
What
server error for some reason. I don't know what happened.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Server error. Server error. Well,
Mhm.
I can play this, which I forgot to play yesterday for one of the news items.
You are correct. It does not compute.
Okay, so let's see. Where were we? We were talking about a question. I'm trying to find where we were on the list. The flare enunciation.
Mhm.
So basically, what happens if you're at 50 feet, you don't get the flare enunciation?
Well, basically, the way it's going to work, it's you're going to come in on an ILS on a single autopilot, and the second you go through 1,500 feet radio altitude, and radio altitude is the distance between the aircraft and the ground itself, not your pressure altitude. So the second you go through 1,500 feet radio altitude, the automatic landing system is going to go through a self-test. If everything works fine, basically the system is going to display a Land 3 enunciation on the top portion of your primary flight display. Basically, Land 3 means that you have all the systems in line and all the backup systems in line to be able to land the airplane automatically. And at that point, the other two autopilots are going to kick in. Now, at any one point, there's only one autopilot controlling the airplane, but the other two are ready to jump in if that autopilot jumps out for some reason or something happens to that autopilot. If the system's degraded for some reason, then the system is going to degrade itself to what's called a Land 2 condition. And Land 2 means that you could still do an Autoland, but you don't have all of the backups available to you, which means that you no longer have an approach that has no minimum. So when you go from Land 3 to Land 2, you have to go from no landing minimum at all to entering a 50-foot decision height. So you actually have to put 50 feet, and you actually have that pre-selected, but out of the way in case the system degrades from Land 3 to Land 2. As you're coming in through 1,000 feet, if anything happens from 1,000 feet to 50 feet, which is where you begin the flare, if there's any ICAS message or any failure, right, you're going to go around. Now, once you get to what's called your alert height, the alert height is 100 feet, usually 100 feet. If anything happens from 1,000 feet to 100 feet, you go around. If anything happens below 100 feet, any failure or any kind of a system degradation or anything at all, that doesn't change the Autoland status enunciator from Land 2 to anything else. If it changes to no Autoland, that basically means that the flare capabilities of the airplane are not there anymore, and you have to do a go around. If nothing changes below 100 feet, then the airplane is already pre-trimmed to be able to do the flare, even if the flare enunciation doesn't show up. The only reason why you would do a go around if it's below 100 feet radio altitude is if you get a no Autoland enunciation on your primary flight display. And I think that's what he's asking here, right? What's the
Well, basically his question is what you're supposed to do if you don't get the flare enunciator turning green.
Now, the only reason why you would do a go around is if the Autoland status enunciator, the ASA, goes from Land 3 or Land 2 to no Autoland. If it goes no Autoland, then the airplane is not going to be able to do an Autoland, and you have to do a go around.
Okay.
So that's what you would do there.
And as is in the case of many airplanes, including mine, when you initiate a go around at 50 feet or less, or maybe even higher than that in your airplane, there's a very likely it's very likely that the airplane will actually touch down in the midst of the go-around procedure.
Well, right, my airplane is certified to lose only 50 feet from the second that you select go around till the second it starts climbing back out again. That's why when you do non-precision approaches, the minimum decision altitude, the MDA, you'll actually set it to 50 feet above the published MDA, so you don't actually bust through your MDA. Right. So it takes 50 feet.
Very interesting. So I think that that most likely answered Moshe's, hope I'm pronouncing his name right, question regarding the 777 and Autolands. And you can hear the music coming up in the background, and it's going back out. There we go. I'm trying to adjust it so it's not too intrusive. And I never do this. I never do the outgoing music. Although, you know, if you've listened to the show, you always hear it at the very end of the show. And oh, well, that's the reason why I don't usually use that one. I thought it was going to be a longer version. Well, anyway, that's an indication that it's time for us to stop today's show. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep recording after this and try to knock out some more feedback. But right now we're right at about the 3 hour point on the episode 175. And so because of that, I'm going to go ahead and end the show. But as I'm probably put out what Rick and I are going to continue to do, as long as Rick is available to do it.
I'm game, absolutely.
Knock out some more of this feedback so we can kind of get close to inbox zero, and we'll be ready to start afresh the next episode, which would be 176. So we'll be putting out a feedback extra, so look for that in your feed. And so if you are interested in learning more about the Airline Pilot Guy show, the Airline Pilot Guy community, what other ways to watch or listen to the show, head over to airlinepilotguy.com. And if you want to contribute to the show, again, that's airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. And you'll see all of that on the wonderful site that Arash manages for us. And thank you again, Arash, for all your hard work with the airlinepilotguy.com website and servers and all that kind of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And let's see, what else? Yeah, I'm going to be on another 4-day trip, I believe, next week. And I don't recall exactly where I'll be, but probably going back and forth between South Florida or south to mid or central Florida to the Northeast, like New York. And that's all I can think of. Anything else, Rick, that you want to mention before we do our official sign-off?
No, thank you guys for making the show possible. We really appreciate your feedback, and we'll try to get to all of you. So, stand by for that.
All right. So I guess the next thing I should say at this point is wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Woohoo! That's Steph.
Awesome.
Really. Doesn't sound at all like her. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording on the audio.
Okay.
And then I'm going to start another audio recording. This is the feedback extra that we're going to continue with. You know, I should probably do, let's see, how am I going to do this with the, well, you know what, with the recording on the video, I better do this. Let's see, let me get over here. I know this is fascinating for those of you watching the video. I am going to, because I promised the people that contribute a certain amount, my patrons that contribute $5 per episode or more are included in a rolling credits at the end of the video. And so in order to follow through on that promise that I have, I'm going to go ahead and, oh wait, before I do that, I need to share my screen. Oh, this is so complicated. Maybe if I do this more, I'll be able to get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll go
that's what
here
she said.
to screen share. And yeah, that's what she said. Maybe you'll get better at it if you practice more. It's not showing up. Oh, I know why. I got to go back over here. For some reason, when I have something in full screen view, I can't share it. So I have to share it not in full screen view first. And then once it's shared, I can go to full screen and it'll fill the screen. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. But that's just the way it works. Okay, so now you should be seeing the rolling credits. And there we go. Are you seeing them?
Let me see here. Dang it. Yeah, wrong screen here. Hang on. There we go. Oh, there we go. See him.
Yeah.
Oh, Daniel Matisse.
Okay, well, don't talk, Rick, because when you do, then your face fills the screen. Stop. I'm going to keep talking. And there we go. I'm going to replay it just to make sure we got everybody, and their acknowledgement that they are contributors at a certain level on Patreon. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read their names as well. Daniel Matiz, Aaron Rui, Lee Hayden, Asa Armin, Justin Williams, Chris Bond, Michael Toledo, Charath Ranganathan, John Anthony Tibbs, Armando Reynal, Larry James, Larry Gregory, Nick Carson, Chris Palmer, Ken Ray, Doug Miani, Andrew Espieg, and Mark Ross. Boy, it was like scrolling faster than I wanted it to. Okay, so there you go. There are the rolling credits that I've promised people of their level. Again, thank you to all of my patrons and all my Coffee Fund contributors for your support. And it really makes a difference, gives me motivation to keep doing this crazy thing that we call the Airline Pilot Guy Show. So let's see here. I think the best thing to do, hope you guys don't mind those that are in the chat room. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, oh, that's you making the comment about a little rush with the Autoland explanation. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end this hangout and I'm going to start another one. So for those of you who are watching this live, just look for another link. Another link in your Twitter feed or our Twitter feed. And Rick will probably retweet it as well in case you're just following him and not me. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to stop this hangout. Yeah. So that's a separate package. That's what she said.